Now, most modern theme and theme frameworks exclusively work with built-in shortcodes. We talked about this in our very first video. Shortcodes are inside your left and right bracket. You close out a shortcode, put it in the left bracket / right bracket, and whatever the shortcode happens to be. Now, what I want to share with you to kind of demystify everything is in the classic layout here, we have tons and tons of information here, but we haven't really talked about in-depth shortcodes. So as an example, I'm going to go here and I'm going to go into carousel slider shortcodes. So here and here. All right, now, this is going to bring up a page with different types of carousels. Carousels meaning that you just click and click and click and click and go to your next page, next page. Here's a smaller carousel, etc., etc. Carousel with columns. So again, here's a client carousel that's full width. So one of the things I want to share with you, so it's not too overwhelming, is get to know your different options by going into these submenus here, going into here, and then just picking it apart. So let's do that. So if I come into here and go into Edit Page, you're going to see how this particular page is laid out. Now, again, what I highly suggest that you do, since you have at your fingertips or at your mouse tips or something about tips or techniques, tips and techniques, hey, that's the ticket, is you have this wonderful create or duplicate a post. So I'm going to create a new draft, and I'm just going to experiment with different ideas. Let's call this version 2 and publish this. Okay, so now what's going to happen, if I scroll down here, this will give me an indication on the different types of carousels that I can use. Okay, and now pretty much are all the same types of carousel, but it's how they're set up. Here's an image carousel. Here's a client carousel. Now, this is not a client carousel. It just happens to be called client carousel. So as an example, if I click right in here, you'll see if I scroll down here to the bottom that it says client carousel. So client carousel is how the information is being displayed. Then how do you want the text alignment? I want the text alignment to the left as opposed to the right. What kind of separator do you want? Again, we go into our separations. We'll keep this the same. Size, H1 through H6. I'll just keep that at H2. A separator color, just because we can. Let's again make it red. And again, the reason I pick red because it's visual. You can see it. And I'm going to save those changes. Okay, so get to know your different types of carousels. So that information can be found if you come up here for a second. If I go into my builder elements, now here's something I really want you to focus on. Now down here at the bottom it says image carousel. Now that is the name of the actual, right here, this is the name of the actual element itself. And if you come up here, this is called recent works. Now, why does it say carousel? Because that's the layout that we're using. So what I want you to focus on is you're not always going to see the word carousel up here. There is an option for carousel inside of recent works. Obviously, this is a carousel. So depending on what you use, some of these different options have carousel options. So as an example, recent work carousel. So if I click at that, this is simply title, H1, H2, where you're aligning to the left, to the right, and then you can put the information that's in here. So that's going to come up based on what you've selected, but don't always assume that everything in here says carousel because it doesn't, and it can be very confusing. So as an example, if I go down here to recent work was the option layout that I picked up here. Carousel as opposed to a grid, as opposed to grids with excerpts. We talked about the before with product placement. So as an example, let's come down here and just share with you the difference. So here I have recent work. I'm going to duplicate that. The only difference I'm going to make here, that puts it down at the bottom here. Actually, where did it put it? Hang on a second. So I'm going to keep one with the carousel and one with a grid, and you'll see the difference. So grid with excerpts. Save that. And again, this is a great way to get to know the environment. You have to understand something. I didn't make the software up, so how do you think I got so good at it? I got good at software by just squeezing the sponge and doing it again and again and again until it became second nature. I'm totally self-taught. My first program I taught myself on a professional level was PageMaker and then Adobe Illustrator back in 87, 88. And if you want to talk about being frustrated, that was me pulling my hair out at 2 o'clock in the morning until the light bulb finally went on and I started to think the way Illustrator thought. And I use that same premise to teach you the same example. So it comes down to something very basic. Create, select, edit. Based on what you've created, you have to have it selected in order to do something to it. So keep in mind that your options are very important. So again, it doesn't say carousel up there at the top, but the carousel options are part of not all elements, but some elements. So this one's set to grid, this one's set to carousel, but it's the same information. So if I come up here to update and I preview my changes, you will see that you'll get a different experience. Now, to make it less confusing, I probably should have named it something that made sense because they both say working with carousels. Okay, working with carousel columns, this is carousel. This is grid-based. Grid-based is going to come up with your categories by default. So depending on how that was set up. Incline carousel with the separator with the red line. I did it in red just so you can visually see the difference. Let's go back to this one more time and let's go down to our options for image carousel. So if I come down here to the bottom, I click the pencil icon. Then I can have a fixed picture size. I can have an auto, which will automatically default to the size of the picture. Choose an autoplay, let's say yes, maximum columns. We want to put a maximum of 6, which would make the images a little bit smaller. Spacing, we could probably get away with 10 pixels of spacing. Scroll items, we're going to make that blank. And navigation, yes. Mouse scroll, no. Border, yes. Image light box, so if I click on that, I can bring up an image light box, and we'll save that. Of course, at this point, if you don't know what I'm talking about with the light box is just going to pop up the image into a separate window. And since I selected yes, watch what happens now. So if I click Preview Changes, and I scroll down to the bottom, so this is set up for a carousel the same way it was before, and this is set up for X amount of images across the bottom. Right now, we said to basically autoplay this. So if I click here, now keep in mind it's the same image, we go ahead and swap those images out. And if I click here, this is good. Actually, I don't know if I did it to that one or the other one. I actually forget now. I think I did it to this one. No, I think I did it. No, there's the light box. That's going to show the light box because I said light box, yes. So to review, just get to know your options when working with your different elements from your page builder. And your page builder goes inside of columns, and once you have information inside of columns, you can set it up, etc., etc. Now, important to understand here, and it's something we'll talk about in a second, is working with columns, and we'll talk about that in our next video.